Robert Plank Show, episode 72. Uncover your inner genius and unlock your creativity. I'm Robert Plank. Welcome back to the Robert Plank Show, where we normally talk about internet marketing, membership sites, and webinars, but we also talk about time management and productivity, and it can apply to you whether you are a work from home, online, self-employed entrepreneur or not. What I like about being able to do things in the modern age, basically, is that you don't have to slow down. If you're on a roll, you can go crazy and schedule out future blog posts if you're a writer, future email autoresponder messages if you're an internet marketer. You can set things up so that during slow times when you're tired or on a vacation or not even at the computer or at home or in the same state or country, your past self on a timer is like an extra employee you don't have to pay. So think about that. If you have even like a blog or a podcast or something, you do, or even like a YouTube channel, you do know that you can create content in advance and basically have periods of time when you're super productive and not productive, but no one in the outside world knows, because when you're productive, you get it all lined up and scheduled for the future, then take a break and let it all play out. Maybe if you're bored right now or stuck in a rut, it's because there's no real risk, challenge, or excitement in your business. And this especially happens if you fall into the trap of lying because nothing is real. And here's what I mean. I mean that, let's say that if you're an employee or you used to be an employee, didn't you sometimes tell little white lies to your boss about how busy you were working supposedly, or how close you were to getting a certain project completed? Well, people who market on the internet kind of do the same thing, exaggerate or lie, or the two most recent ones I've seen. One is where someone put in a special code in his tracking software, and he was able to make a number look a lot bigger than it was. And in a different situation, someone else so-called participated in a $1 million launch, right? Where some of these marketing geeks emailed to the same big offer, and because he emailed to that offer where the person who ran the promotion made $1 million before refunds, before chargebacks, before his expenses, before paying affiliates out, before giving affiliates prizes, but still technically $1 million. But this particular marketer, because he emailed to this $1 million launch, he now can technically say he was so-called involved in the $1 million launch, even though, well, you're misleading people and making it sound like you made $1 million. But the problem with that kind of stretching the truth and lying is that if you have to go bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, then you're going to get burned out and not as excited as if you just kind of were accountable to yourself. You don't have to brag and tell people about every little thing you do. And the problem with getting your so-called high or your excitement from the lie, or how big of a lie you can get away with, is that you can get excited just by inventing a new lie and thinking about a new lie, and then you end up putting all your time, energy, and focus into the talking and the lying and not to doing. So instead, let's do the Roger Bannister kind of 4-minute mile. Roger Bannister was a runner who was the first person in history in like the 1950s to run a mile in 4 minutes. For millennia before then, no human being ran a mile in 4 minutes, and then that same year, many others, and many since, have ran a mile in 4 minutes. And I think the lesson to be drawn from that is that sometimes it just takes someone else doing something huge for others to realize it's possible and then to follow suit. I've had days where I've cranked out 100 different articles, 100, 400 plus word pieces of content. And it was from scheduling and having a structure and having the motivation and having a system where I could do it in 40-minute increments 10 times over, and then I was done. With our course at makeaproduct.com, it's possible to create a book in an afternoon. At our course at webinarcrusher.com, it's possible to create a whole online course or class in an afternoon. I've been at airports on a layover returning home from a conference and had 90 minutes and cranked out a report that made me thousands of dollars over time. I used to put out a thing called an information product. I used to put out courses on how to program PHP. I would do that twice a week and make roughly $2,000 for every product I created. So $4,000 a week consistently by creating these big, long, 2 or 3 hour videos with about an 80-page written report and about 7 to 10 pieces of software. There you go. There's your $20,000 month right there from these $4,000, $5,000 weeks. So we break things down. And for example, if someone says they want to make $100,000 in a month or $100,000 in a year, that kind of income, then the first logical question that comes after that is how many products do you need to sell to achieve that goal? Or $1,000 per hour income from webinars, or a 1 hour per week full-time income, which is we use Amazon FBA to do that. We have a course at dropshipceo.com, a 1 hour per day income. You can use a site called Fiverr, Fiverr.com, and provide testimonials, voiceovers, do graphics work. You can have a full-time income from 1 hour per day if you do a few things right. It's always possible to think your way out of a situation. For example, the physicist Albert Einstein asked the question, what would it be like to ride along a wave of light? Light has a set speed. If you look at the sun, you're actually seeing the sun from 8 minutes ago. If you look out at the night sky, you're actually seeing millions of years, or stars that existed millions of years ago that no longer exist, because the speed of light only travels at a certain speed and nothing can go faster than that. So then Albert Einstein wondered what it would be like to ride on a wave of light, and that's how he came up with the theory of relativity and all kinds of cool stuff like that. Now, I don't want to get too off on a tangent from the metaphysical or the internet marketing stuff, but the same formula has been appearing over and over, especially when it comes to not just building your business and internet marketing, but also this creativity topic that we're talking about today. And the formula that keeps appearing is this thing called WWHW. That stands for why, what, how to, what if. Just like the number pi, or like Fibonacci sequences, if you know what those are, certain numbers appear all over the place in nature, in space, in the stock market, over and over again. And I found that when I am creating a course, making a thing called a sales letter or a landing page, why, what, how to, what if appears over and over when, for example, I'm creating a 1 hour webinar to sell something. I start off with why this thing's important, what we're going to be talking about. The majority is the how to solve a simple problem. And finally, the what if is then, what do you do now? Buy my product. This formula works very well for me when creating a chapter for a book, because different types of people have differently wired brains. Some brains focus on the why, some on the what, some on the how to, some on the what if, and now we're covering all our bases. In a sales letter, same idea, where we start off with why you're here, what's the problem and how will we solve it. The how to is the step-by-step on how the course you're about to buy will solve it. And then the what if is, what if you buy this? I use this formula over and over, and that is the structure for today, talking about creativity. The process you go through is really just, if you think about it, isn't just to get inspired, think of ideas. It's just start with the problem. You identify the problem, and that's huge right there. And maybe you do that without even thinking, but if a lot of people who are scatterbrains don't even realize the problem they're trying to solve. They're just following the steps, going through the motions. So we identify the problem and then slowly and slowly get dialed into the solution. If I'm selling something, even from the stage or from one of our live events in Salt Lake City, I start off with the vagueness, right? The why is this important? And then the what gets us a little more dialed in, where we talk about basically the basic steps, the 100,000 foot view, the outline of what we're about to talk about. And then the how to are the steps on how we'll solve it. And then the what if is buy my stuff. And the what if part is the most focused, almost word for word every time. But the why, where it begins, is the most, where there's the most freedom. So we go why, what, how to, what if, and each step along the way get more and more focused. And so today we're going to talk about these 4 steps of creativity. The first is the why, where we reframe or change the interpretation. The what is where we mind map or branch out. The how is where we get the insight, get the solution. And then finally, we're going to rename the last step a little bit. Instead of what if, we'll say now or implement, which is called creative flow. Why, what, how to, what if in the context of creativity is reframe, mind map, insight, and creative flow. Now, I want to give credit where credit is due because I'm not just reteaching someone else's stuff, I'm combining a few different things, but Mark McGinnis thought of the sequence of reframe, mind map, insight, creative flow, and then me, Robert Plank, I am applying that to WWHW, and then later on, there's going to be a couple other important things as we unpack each of those steps. But why, what, how to, what if, reframe, mind map, insight, and creative flow. Reframe means that we're going to hit the problem with multiple angles and ask probing questions. The mind map is where we structure or outline or figure out what needs to be added or removed or in the sequence. The how is where we actually solve the roadblock we come across, and then the creative flow is where we have it fall into place, get motivated, and implement and do things, right? Because I mean, when I think of a creative person or creativity, I just think of having lots of ideas. But to be creative is to create, meaning make something new and valuable like an idea or an invention. An idea could be part of it, but if someone creates an invention or someone is an inventor and they're creative, they don't just think of cool things to think of, they actually solve problems. And even if you're writing a book, writing an article, making a video, making software, you're making some progress. You're actually having something usually tangible that you have created to solve or overcome this problem. Now, what I do a lot in my business is create online courses like at membershipcube.com. And in that, we show how to solve problems, usually the problem of not making money or of mastering technology. And my business partner, Lance Tomashiro, and I, when we meet together, we have to figure out usually how to put this course in boxes, right? And how to make things where first of all, it goes in a logical sequence, but also the first module, the first 60 to 90 minute portion is really helpful and exciting and gets a lot of things done. That way it's easier for us to sell it. We also have to figure out how to make the course we're going to teach usually fit into 4 modules, sometimes 8 modules. Again, a module is a 60 to 90 minute video session where we go through within that module WWHW, why, what, how to, what if, and at the end it leads to, now that we showed you some stuff, now it's time for you to have this assignment, but we have to figure out how to make the things we're going to show, the problems we're going to solve, fit into those boxes of 4 or 8 modules and make the modules themselves fit into 60 or 90 minutes and cram in the things we want to talk about, but also not go over their heads and be too crazy. And Lance and I get a little annoyed with each other when we plan our courses. I'll just say it because I have a certain idea of what I want to have in the course. He has an idea of what he wants in the course. And it's not necessarily a matter of meeting in the middle. I hate the word compromise. Compromise means that no one gets what they want. It means that everyone's unhappy and it's somewhere in between of what each person wants. But instead, a better way to look at it is we each have an idea of what the course is going to be, and we kind of just break it down and go point by point. And basically, he'll win sometimes and I'll win sometimes. And my tendency is to overload and put too much stuff in, and his tendency is to pull things back and not commit to too much. And then we figure out, well, how do we get to the point? Not where it's a compromise, which means that neither of us is happy, but have it where it's basically evolved to where we're both happy, if that makes sense. It's an art versus a science. There's a step-by-step sequence you can go through to solve a problem, to set up a website, set up a WordPress site, create a sales letter. But even after that, then there are times when you get stuck, and that's where intuition or spot check problem solving comes into play, where you look at something and if a graphic doesn't look quite right, or if a web page doesn't look quite right, you need to use your common sense to fix it. And you need both ends of that. You need to be able to follow instructions to get the basic prototype minimum viable product online, and then to adjust that later, you need a little bit of the art or the intuition. And I know people who only have one or the other, or only think in terms of one or the other, and you have both, but you need to listen to that part of your brain basically. And I mean, it's frustrating when we tell somebody to make a web page, they make it exactly as we show them, and then we say, okay, now make it your own or change some stuff up, and they can't do it unless they're told exactly what to do. And that's what we're going to be talking about today is creativity, which means not only to create but also to think your way out of the problems facing your online business or maybe just your life in general. And it's frustrating to look up how to solve problems or get creative because you run into a lot of either psychology nerds talking about the hippocampus and dendrites in your lizard brain, and then there's business words talking about Six Sigma and having your key metrics, your KPIs, and all this craziness, and then your artists saying, well, you have to listen to good music and write in a spiral and sit cross-legged, and we're not going to talk about any of that. We're going to talk about how to just get some stuff done and distill the noise down. So, have you ever taken notes on stuff? Well, of course you have. Maybe in college, or you went to an online or offline seminar, online webinar event. So my question to you as we get started here is, do you take 20 pages of notes every time you attend a webinar or a seminar and then never get to anything? And if you notice, usually you spend so much time with your head buried in your notebook that you miss out on what's really important. And I see this all the time when, once again, we run live events, people will take notes, and maybe during the break, I won't spy, but I'll just something will catch my eye. Someone left a scrap of paper left out in my eyesight, and they take notes on the weirdest things. They take notes on like unimportant things, or they'll circle, find a niche, make a website. I'm thinking, but you knew how to find a niche, make a website. And my thinking, and maybe that you're different, my thinking, if I'm looking at a video, attending a webinar, or attending an offline seminar, I'm looking for 5 bullet points or just some key takeaways. I think to myself, I'm attending this offline event because I'm looking to solve a specific problem. Traffic, joint ventures, conversion, doing more in less time, stuff like that. And if I pick up a couple bullet points here and there, I don't need to be greedy. I don't need to write down I don't need to write a transcript of literally every little thing that someone said. I just need 5 bullet points that'll help me right now. And you'll notice many times that, how about this? If you've bought a course online, go back and watch the course again. Even if you think you know everything, you're going to pick up probably 5 things differently than you picked up 6 months or a year ago, because you can only absorb so much stuff. And I think that if you find yourself getting frustrated, maybe you've tried to absorb too much, you have to dial it back and separate the forest from the trees. Because if you're so worried about not missing a thing and writing every little thing down, then you're going to get so bogged down by the details that you don't see the big picture, the end goal, the reason why, the do's and don'ts. I've presented about things like how to customize a WordPress site, and I said, here's how I make it look this way, here's how I get it set up, here's how I change up the sidebar, and people were feverishly writing down, okay, you clicked on that. I'm thinking, well, you don't have to write down every step, just look at where I went, look at the menu I went to, and then you can figure out the rest of it on your own. There's a difference between getting a breakthrough and getting aroused and excited. I was at another event once where someone presented about 187 different types of content. Everyone was just so bewildered and kind of dazed, but at the same time super pumped up. And this guy was like, man, he talked about 187 types of content. I said, great. What was your favorite? He couldn't, out of the 187, couldn't list one. I'm like, okay, fine. Like, then what's the top 10 ones, or one of them in the top 10? He couldn't tell me. I was like, well, then tell me one. You heard 187 ways to write content. Just tell me one so I know, and I get an idea of what some of these ways were. And he said, oh, well, one of the ways was to write what you know. And I think, oh, great. So that wasn't very helpful at all. So the problem with overloading is that you become a mile wide and an inch deep. There's no real progress made, just a lot of, maybe, is anti-progress a word? Because it's like less than progress. It's like, well, to do nothing, to learn nothing, you'd stay in the same spot, but now you're even more confused and frustrated than you were because you weren't looking to solve problems, but you were instead just taking in information, which leads to more questions and more issues. So getting excited about something is good for pitching or presenting or things like that, but bad for actual helpful how-to information product. And it's kind of a fine line, especially that a lot of us speakers or internet marketers run into, is when are we going to do a wow moment or an aha moment, right? A wow moment is I'm going to show you some cool stuff, make you feel better, eliminate the confusion. That is useful. And then the aha moment are, well, now here's what to change. And I mean, telling someone to change is a really risky and tough thing to do. And so, I put all that out there to tell you that, well, maybe that's why you've been stuck in a rut or stuck in the mud or just hit a wall sometimes, is that there are times when we need to think in wow terms and other times we need to think in aha terms. Sometimes we need to just remove all the noise and other times we need to change. Mel Rhodes tells us that in order to get creativity going, there's the 4 P's: process, product, person, or place. Change the process, change the product, change the person, or change the place to get your creativity going. So let's talk about why, what, how to, what if. But first, the marketer of the week is a guy named Ken Evoy, whose website is Make Your Price Sell. I think it's still around, makeyourpricesell.com. This is one of the first guys I learned internet marketing from. Not the first, but one of the first. And he had some cool stuff to say. And his brand was make your blank sell. Make your word sell, make your site sell, make your price sell. And he had this course, book, follow-up sequence about making your price sell. And he had this cool thing in there, this cool little piece of software that had a dynamic price. And basically you go to his webpage and it said, well, to buy the Make Your Price Sell course, the price currently is $67.30. But then there'd be like a little bit of a countdown timer, and then it would go down to $67.29, $67.28. And I was like, what the heck is this? So you go to his webpage and it would slowly tick down the cents. And the longer you were on the webpage, the lower the price went. And you think, well, okay, well, what's the point of that? Because I'm not motivated to buy from this guy because his price is dropping and dropping and dropping. But then suddenly it would jump up to like $77.10. And basically what he had set up was a dynamic pricing tool that he invented and created, and it worked kind of like the stock market where the price drop. If someone bought a copy of his course, the price everyone saw would suddenly jump up. And the idea it was that the price would adjust based on demand. So there's something to that. And then what I then did was I thought, well, I had never even considered the possibility of dynamically changing the price. And so I made a plugin to have a button someone could buy a course from. And there was a countdown timer, and after the timer ran out, the button disappeared. And I thought, how else could we move this idea forward? Well, then we said, here's a button, and the price counts down, and once the counter hits 0, the price increases. So now you're motivated to buy before the price increases. I thought, that's kind of cool. How can we, in the next iteration, do even better? And then I combined the Kenny voice stuff and the countdown timer stuff, where then the price would be, for example, $7 for something I'm selling. And then if someone else bought, the price would jump for everyone who hadn't bought yet to $7.05. That person bought, the price would jump for everyone to $7.10 and up and up and up. So then we're just combining things and moving things along in the next logical sequence. And this is going to apply a lot when we're talking about deliberative cognitive thinking, deliberate emotional thinking, spontaneous cognitive thinking, and spontaneous emotional thinking. More on that later, but the big breakthrough for me recently has been that there are 4 different types of creativity. And then once again, we'll unpack this in a little bit, but the 4 types of creativity are deliberate cognitive, deliberate emotional, spontaneous cognitive, and spontaneous emotional. I did not invent this. This matrix idea was invented by Professor Arne Dietrich, and we'll unpack that in the how section. But real quick, why reframe, what mind map, how insight, and then now creative flow. Why, what, how, now. All right. So reframing means that you have a problem and you're hitting the problem from multiple angles with probing questions, because questions must be answered by your brain. We're asking questions like, what's the big problem we're having, and what happens if someone does not have this solution, a common enemy? The next question is, what am I solving, a specific goal? The next question is, what's the current way to solve it? And finally, why is my solution better? We also might ask, who am I solving it for specifically? Why does this even matter? What's the bigger picture? What can I personally learn from this? What's funny about this? How do I start this? And what do I do after this? If you think about different things, like for example, the iPhone was an iteration of making a BlackBerry better. What if we had a phone and we also were able to browse web pages and have the GPS on there and record video and watch video on this mobile device that is more than just a phone? An iPad is where what if is a kind of a next iteration, or a tablet is an iteration of the netbook. So they'd put out these cheap laptops where all they were meant for was not to code software or to do graphics work, but just to browse the web. So they thought, well, what if we had a device that could browse the web, but it didn't have a mouse on it, but you couldn't do a lot with it because it's only for doing things like browsing the web. In this why reframe section, where our goal is childlike curiosity, because kids ask lots of questions about the world, but adults are set in their ways. Think about when you were younger and you questioned everything. We need to figure out what exactly is our target, right? If we're trying to make a better mousetrap, if we're trying to make a better WordPress plugin than everyone else, if we're trying to write a book that is about a proven subject, like maybe you're making a book about time management or something, but it has a new unique spin on time management, well, this is where these questions will help you. And this is why you'll actually know what you're building towards, what a concept. So you ask yourself, well, how can I make something that is familiar but a new spin on twist that I'm not necessarily a me too? In this section, we limit perfectionism, and just to get the juices flowing, we might do some free writing and maybe even just like look on a web page or open a book to a random page, choose a random word, and apply that word to your situation. Like I don't know how well this is going to work. There's a car service manual right here. And so if I randomly pick a word, then I'm going to say, okay, pressure. So now I can write down the word pressure, and then I can apply that to the problem I'm trying to solve. So if I'm trying to make a WordPress plugin to manage your multiple WordPress sites, how does this pressure, I'm going to write the word pressure, draw an arrow, and say manage WP sites. How does pressure apply to that? Well, the pressure could be the pressure of time, the pressure of worried that they're going to get hacked, the pressure of logging in. And the idea here is to get your brain used to making connections and to get the words flowing. What if I ask you to write down as many C words as possible? Don't think about cuss words, but I guess the word cuss is a word that begins with the word C. Cuss, car, control, creativity, we're talking about that today. Clarity, clear. Well, even if you wrote down 10 or 20 cuss words, C words, then tomorrow your brain is still going to be moving along like a locomotive, thinking of more C words. In this stage, there are no bad ideas, and you want to avoid criticizing. Now, criticizing is only good if you ask, how could I have done this better? But you don't want to stop your thinking. You don't want to get tripped up and be afraid to even complete a thought. And I don't know if that's why you got in the right that you're currently in if you're listening to this program, but we want to have the childlike curiosity and get the juices flowing to ask probing questions and change the interpretation and figure out what it is we're trying to solve. Now, there are many ways to solve something, and when I talk about ways to solve something, in my case, I'm a computer programmer, I will list different features or things we could have in a WordPress management plugin. I say, well, we could have a feature to write content, to create posts, to install plugins, to update WordPress, and I'm just brain dumping different things in there. If you're making a book about time management, then brain dump the things that you know. If there are ways to isolate yourself or ways to stop checking email all the time, we're just going to dump out the different possibilities or the solutions or the sub-solutions. We're just going to dump out a bunch of things, and this is where mind mapping or branching out helps. I use a tool called FreeMind, FREEMIND. Google search that, install that program, and this is a tool where you can structure, outline, manipulate, or trim the ideas or the components of your ideas and rearrange them into a logical step-by-step sequence. This is the part where now this is the what, like we said, but we want to separate the wheat from the chaff. That means that we're going to dump out everything and then sort it out later on using the mind map. If we're putting out a course about how to sell using Amazon's seller program, then we're going to brain dump all the things that you could do, right? Like there's a way to sell using where you ship the item on Amazon. One of the things that needs to be done is to list your item on Amazon. One item is to deal with your competitors. There might be software tools to use, like to mess with the price, mess with the description. We could talk about how to revise and have a good description on your Amazon items. We're brain dumping the problems and the sub-problems and then getting it dialed in. And there's two directions to go. You can diverge, which means to go bigger in scope and seek out new things to add, but then also converge to decide, connect guidelines, or figure out the guidelines for that, and then reduce what we're talking about. And I mean, the motivational speaker Anthony Robbins points out that the word decide means to cut off, right? If you talk about a suicide or a homicide, side at the end of a word, the suffix side means to kill. So decide means to cut off, or we're removing possibilities, and so we're taking an action, or going into whatever path that we need to go into. So mind mapping is where we can combine, split, add, or move, and edit. And Professor Elliot Eisner tells us that there are 4 ways to do this: boundary pushing, inventing, boundary breaking, and aesthetic organizing. Now, aesthetic organizing, that last one, is the most common one. We sort out the ways or the categories to do things, but there's boundary pushing, inventing, boundary breaking, and aesthetic organizing. Let me go through them real quick. Boundary pushing means that the rules are holding us back, so let's bend the rules a little bit, not necessarily break them, but just kind of go 10% beyond the rules. Inventing means that we have useful combinations. We combine things that do or maybe don't belong, like the first iPhone combined having a phone and having an internet browser and having a communication device, so it's an all-in-one kind of tool. Boundary breaking is the least common, where we go to opposite thinking, gap filling, and that the rules themselves are the problem. And then the most common is aesthetic organizing, where we derive order from chaos. We list a bunch of stuff and then we group them into categories, so then now it actually makes sense. Now, one more time to make sure you got it: this boundary pushing, boundary breaking, aesthetic organizing, and inventing. Boundary pushing means, well, can we shave 1 second off the speed of the software, or remove 1 step from the process someone has to go through to refine it? Boundary breaking is where we totally change up the game, and maybe we host the software for them. Or the iPhone said, what if we had no buttons on it, or just the one button and the whole phone was a touch screen? The iPad said, what if we didn't have a USB port and it was just like the self-contained tablet? And I mean, you see, computers where they put out computers now with no CD drive. Just something to try, right? And so that is boundary breaking. And aesthetic organizing, this is where you categorize things. And this helps me a lot. And I kind of picked this up from watching old late 80s, early 1990s TV shows. I'm talking about, sound like a nerd, Star Trek, Next Generation, and Red Dwarf. And if you notice those TV shows, so Star Trek, every season of that show, they pretty much have an episode with the Borg, and then they have an episode with Q, and they have usually a Klingon episode. But every season, they have certain categories, and it's not like it's exactly where like a third episode is exactly this, but they make sure to cover that base every time in the season. This silly British show, Red Dwarf, every season, or just about, they have a time travel episode. So that narrows down things and organizes it better. And the way this applies to me personally is, if I make a podcast, I will first of all group my episodes into groups of 10, right? So I'll be thinking about, okay, well, all I need to do is just think of the next 10 episodes of the Robert Plank Show. So that's the season 1, supposedly, the first 10 episodes. Then season 2 are the next 10 episodes, and so on. And I'll tell myself, well, in this block or chunk or season of the next 10 episodes, I'm going to have a podcast about something WordPress related, a podcast of something case study related, a podcast that's mindset related, kind of like this. We're talking about creativity, a podcast episode that's marketing related, a podcast episode that's writing related. And so that already kind of organizes what I want. And then finally, inventing or combining things that don't belong. We try out the different combinations and permutations and then do a thing called an A or B eye doctor test. I didn't realize I was doing this until I began doing more graphics work. So the big thing about graphics or design or the way things look is you look at someone else's logo, web page, interface, whatever. You look at it and it's more helpful, instead of copying it exactly, to see why it works and to pluck out the ideas from it. And you might look at a logo and say, well, I want to make a logo that looks like this, and I like the color scheme, I like how this certain text is bigger than the rest, and then I'll pull out one or two ideas from that. Or I can look at 10 logos and pick out ideas from each one and then combine them and see how it looks. And then once I have that, then I say, what if I enlarged this text? What if I changed this color? And then I only look at it and say, which is better, A or B? The original one with the blue text or the new one with the green text? And then I say, okay, well, if the first one's fine, then great. I'm still at the peak that it could be. If the green text looks better than the blue text, I say, well, now we're 10% better than where we were, and we can just move along in the steps like that. Mind mapping, branching out, boundary pushing, boundary breaking, aesthetic organizing, and inventing. That's where we figure out, well, we had the question that we ask in the why or the reframe section, and then now in the what or the mind map section, we're getting it down into sub problems, features, the logical step-by-step sequence. But now we need the part that makes it really pop, right? We need the core of it. We need the thing that makes it different. We need the spin on it. And this is where a lot of people get stuck. Because just to give you a little roadmap of where we're headed in the final two sections here, the how section is insight, which is where you get the big problem solved, the big breakthrough. And then the now part, the creative flow, will be to implement the solution and to actually do what you were going to do. But this how section, the insight section, this is where this Professor Arne Dietrich creativity matrix comes in, where we get the solution. And so I'm going to ask you, I know I'm doing an audio format and I'm asking you to visualize or draw something, but I've drawn on my piece of paper a grid with 2 columns and 2 rows. So we've just drawn, I guess, how do I explain this? I drew a square. I put 1 line down the middle, 1 line across. Okay, so we have a grid of 4 sections, right? And at the top, I wrote the word cognitive. That's the top left. So not in the box, but above it, kind of like the grids, right? So in the top left above the box, I said cognitive, and then the top right just above the box is emotional. So that means that the first column, the 2 boxes up and down are cognitive. Then the other 2 boxes up and down on the right are emotional. Then on the left side, to the left of this 2x2 little grid or table, I will write the word deliberate at the top one, and then spontaneous at the bottom one. So then we have an empty table with 4 little boxes to fill in, but above the table we have cognitive and emotional, and to the left of the table we have deliberate and spontaneous. And I guess I'll have to put a graphic in today's show notes to make sure you really got it. But the idea here is that because we made this 2x2 grid, we're going to fill in the box something that is deliberate and cognitive, right? Cognitive means thinking. Deliberate means you do it on purpose. Deliberate and emotional. And then spontaneous and cognitive, and spontaneous and emotional. So if you see this visualized, it'll make a lot more sense. So we're making a 2x2 table with 4 things to fill in: deliberate cognitive, deliberate emotional, spontaneous cognitive, and spontaneous emotional. All right, so what I'm going to do is in deliberate cognitive, I'll write the word Thomas Edison, and this is basically just willpower. Okay, so Thomas Edison, the way he would invent things is he would just exhaust all the ways it didn't work, and all that was left was the way that it did work. His most famous quote is that, "I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways it won't work." You build up your knowledge, you pay attention to what happens when you play around, make the connections, and just by marching forward, you eventually get to your aha moment. Your big, or not your aha moment, but your big breakthrough. The aha moment is deliberate emotional. So in deliberate emotional category, so the top right section, we write in the term aha. This is where you have a flash of insight or emotions or feelings where all the things you did incorrectly suddenly just you have this big revelation based on this string of bad choices. So in the top left section, the Thomas Edison willpower deliberate cognitive section, we kind of went in a very logical sequence, and there was not really that much emotion involved. We tried this, tried this, boom, finally found the answer. Deliberate emotional is when you kind of reflect back on what you did and all the story or the meaning of what brought you there, and suddenly you have that aha moment. Now let's fill in the bottom two squares. Spontaneous cognitive is Isaac Newton and the apple. Have you heard of that story? Isaac Newton was trying to figure out gravity. An apple supposedly fell on his head. I don't think it actually did, but this is where you have out of the box unconscious thinking, where you were kind of thinking about it, but then you moved on, and then boom, now you had this eureka kind of rush moment where it's not super emotional, but you stopped thinking, your brain kept on going, and then boom, it figured out the answer. And then finally, the bottom right corner is spontaneous emotional, and this is the Albert Einstein section. This is where like artists and musicians get their ideas or inspiration. It's the least controlled, and it's usually what you think of when you think of creativity. This is where Albert Einstein asked, what would it be like to ride on a wave of light? Couldn't figure it out, went back and played, I don't know, the trumpet or something, or clarinet or whatever the heck he played, and then boom, now he didn't even know where the idea came from, but he was able to solve it. And so you need to get some part of all these quadrants, and if you realize that these quadrants exist, well, then now you'll stop waiting to be inspired, because it's not necessarily that you're in a productive mood versus a creative mood. It's that you might just be, your mindset could be just in one of these quadrants. Now, if you want to get to one of these quadrants, or you're stuck in one, here's how to get to each one. The top left corner, deliberate and cognitive, I'm going to write outside of the box. I'm going to write quiet, or I'm going to write knowledge plus time. That's what I'll write. Knowledge plus time. Draw an arrow going into the top left box of deliberate and cognitive, Thomas Edison willpower. Next, I will write quiet time, also outside of the box, and draw an arrow and put it into the top right corner. So quiet time gets you the deliberate, emotional aha moment. Then, for the spontaneous stuff, escape / incubation, and I'll draw an arrow going into spontaneous cognitive. So changing your scenery, changing your environment, going somewhere else, going up to the cabin, so to speak, to figure it out. That's where you get the spontaneous cognitive, right? The spontaneous logical thinking. And then the toughest one to get a grasp on, the randomness, that is where spontaneous emotion comes in, the bottom right corner. So, deliberate cognitive, that's Thomas Edison willpower, which you get from knowledge plus time. Deliberate emotional, that's the aha moment, which you get from quiet time. Spontaneous cognitive is the Isaac Newton apple eureka moment, which you get from escape or incubation. And then the spontaneous emotional Albert Einstein, artist, musician kind of inspiration, that comes randomly. We can't really control that part. You need all four, and ideas come to you when you're in the shower, and Einstein calls this the combinatory play, where if you're really hitting a wall, if the deliberate cognitive Thomas Edison style isn't working for you, then you stop working on the problem and get to something else, and then it'll come to you when you least expect it. You can't let someone else's negativity get inside your head and prevent you from reaching your true potential. And another helpful frame of mind to get yourself into is something we call magic wand thinking. If there were no limitations, what would you come up with? If you can design the coolest, the best book, and don't worry about how much work it's going to be or how many people you have to talk to or how many months it'll take, just what if you had a magic wand and poof, you could have that book done? If I'm thinking about what would be the perfect offer to sell someone. What if I were to sell someone a package for $10,000? What would be in it? If I were to make the perfect WordPress plugin that everyone would use, would it be something that managed their membership sites, sales letters, took payments for them, sent out emails for them, managed their customers? Well, let me not think just yet about the work it'll take or how to do it, but let me unlock the possibilities. Paint yourself into a corner to get out of your comfort zone and take a risk. And if you're stuck, you need a thing called a state change. Go out and exercise, take a break, take a shower like the writer Aaron Sorkin does, or take a nap and let your subconscious do the work like Winston Churchill does. All those things are just to change your state to get to the breakthrough of deliberate cognitive, deliberate emotional, spontaneous cognitive, or spontaneous emotional. And finally, the final now section, which is called creative flow, where it all falls into place and you implement the solution. What we're looking to do is get to uh, an enjoyable experience that Tony Robbins calls a class or one or a type 1 experience, where there's different activities that you can do, but the best thing is where you do something that feels good, is good for you, helps others, and helps the greater good. Repetition is the mother of skill, and we start off with anything that we're trying to accomplish with unconscious incompetence. I don't know how to begin at something. I don't know what I don't know. But we get to conscious incompetence where I realize what it is I don't know. Then conscious competence where I now can do something but I have to really work at it. And then unconscious competence where it becomes automatic. So the creative flow or the flow state or getting in the groove, this is where you figure out your routine, meaning that the best writers, for example, write every day and write on certain hours of the day and write like an exact amount of time every day, like 90 minutes exactly every day at 5 a.m. every day. And if they stop mid-sentence, then they're done. Or like Stephen King famously, if he's writing in a 90-minute session and in the first 30 minutes he finishes a book, what does he do? He writes the end and then immediately starts a new book. So it's just having this rigid structure, but then within that has creativity. You figure out what motivates and demotivates you. You use the time crunch to rush to get things done during alone time, and then there's some brain tricks you can use. For example, and I've tried this a little bit, and you should try it more. Blue backgrounds tend to inspire more creativity, and then red backgrounds inspire more attention to detail. So that means if you're in the how or the third or the insight stage, trying to figure out how to work your way out of a problem, then you need to be looking at things that are a blue background. And what if you just have like a blue piece of paper that you put on your desk or on your wall, or you set your desktop background to a blue color? Then when it's time to implement in this D or this, the fourth or now or creative flow, like I'm outlining this as A is why, reframe, B is what, mind map, C is how, insight, D is now creative flow. If you're in this D stage, this type D area, then you need a red background so that you get things just perfect. So there are all these brain tricks where you can set a time limit for the time you're allowing your brain to get to the solution, and by having these habits, you can get back to a state when you were excited, crazy, and unstoppable. And I know you've been in that kind of situation where you just nothing could stop you. You had total focus and you were super pumped up. So think back to if you are a visual person, what did that look like? Let's pretend that a security camera was somehow watching you from the upper left corner of the room, wherever that would be in your room. What did that look like? What colors were in the room? Was it a big picture or a small picture? Were the pictures moving or standing still? Was it one large picture or lots of small pictures? Were they like Polaroid pictures or was it like a full-on movie? Was it a 3D or a 2D picture? Or if you're more of an audio person, what did that sound like? Was there like the clacking of the computer keyboards? Was there music in there? Was your heart beating? What did it feel like? Was it hot? Was it cold? Was you getting the chills down your spine, the goosebumps on your head? Or did you feel the blood pouring through you? Think about all those attributes and to get back to that one place in your mind when you're super pumped up, super excited. So creativity actually, there's still a little bit of a mystery to it, but it is probably more scientific than you thought before listening to this call. We can first of all break it down into 4 sections: why, what, how, and now. And then we can go a little deeper and apply that structure that appears everywhere just to creativity. Why equals the reframe, where we change the interpretation and ask questions like, what's the problem? What am I solving? What's the current accepted way to solve it? Why is my solution better? Who am I solving it for? Why does it matter? What can I learn about it? What's funny about it? How do I start this? And what do I do after? And now that you have got the questions figured out, now let's not quite solve every question or solve the whole thing, but let's solve it and attack it in 1,000 different ways. We mind map out and list different ways to push the boundaries where we bend the rules, or break the boundaries where we rewrite or change all the rules. Aesthetic organizing, where we organize things into boxes or categories, and then inventing, where we combine things that do or don't belong. Great, that's the mind mapping section. And then now to figure out how it all ties together, or answer the big question, or figure out how you're different, or things like that. That's the how, or the insight section, which is where this R&D trick creativity matrix idea comes in. We draw a grid with 4 boxes in it, and then we figure out, well, we need to shift gears and solve this problem from all 4 of these angles: from deliberate cognitive Thomas Edison willpower, deliberate emotional aha moments from quiet time, spontaneous cognitive, the Isaac Newton Apple escape incubator phase, and then the spontaneous emotional Albert Einstein randomness, where you'll really get things solved that way. And then finally, now, creative flow, where it all falls into place. And this is where the usual productivity stuff works, where you might, have a drink, have some caffeine, get yourself excited, close down all the distractions, set a time limit, and get yourself motivated to knocking out just that one chapter of the book, just that one blog post, just that one video, just that first version of that piece of software. Actually implement it, because creativity doesn't just mean being scatterbrained, running around with your head cut off. Ideas are part of it, but creativity means to create or to invent. Questions are okay, solutions are better. You need help. You need both. You do need help, but I hope that today's call solved it. But questions are good, answers are better, and you need to break the problem down and figure out where you're going wrong. You might be answering or asking the wrong questions, or answering them incorrectly. So we go through and reframe, mind map, get the insight with that matrix, and then finally creative flow to get pumped up, get in the groove, and do what needs to be done. I'm Robert Plank, and that was how to uncover your inner genius and unlock your creativity. Go to robertplank.com/072 to see that diagram right there, and join us inside of Time Management on Crack to get more mindset and productivity advice. And then join us inside of incomemachine.com to get your whole entire online system set up, including your niche, website, opt-in page, follow-up sequence, sales letter, membership site, download page, blog, traffic, and more. That's incomemachine.com. But even if you're not an internet marketer per se, and you need more mindset help like this, join us inside of timemanagementoncrack.com. I'm Robert Plank. I look forward to seeing you inside of Time Management on Crack. I look forward to seeing you on the blog, or rating and reviewing our podcast at robertplankshow.com/iTunes. Have a great week. Be creative, invent and create some stuff, and thank you.